When a powerful CEO brought his pregnant mistress at a lavish family dinner, he thought he would humiliate his black wife into silence. But what he didn't know was that years of infidelity, cheating, and betrayal had been met not with rage, but with the quiet brilliance and diligence of a black woman. In one swift, elegant move, she unleashed a plan he never saw coming, making him regret everything and lose it all in front of everyone who once admired him. This is the story of how a black woman turned her husband's arrogance into the greatest downfall of his life. Stay tuned and watch the story unfolds. Celeste Morgan moved through the room with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to command attention, because she already had it. At 44, Celeste had perfected the art of presence. Her deep brown skin glowed under the soft lighting. She didn't wear her power, she embodied it. To the untrained eye, she looked like the poised wife of a powerful man. To those who knew her better, she was something else entirely. Mrs. Langford, one of the catering managers, approached her with cautious reverence, clipboard in hand. "Chef is confirming final prep for the amuse-bouche. Shall we proceed as scheduled?" Celeste glanced at the gilded grandfather clock in the corner. 6:42 p.m., yes, she said with a nod. "Let's begin service at 6:50, not a minute later. Mr. Langford prefers the entree to follow within 15. The manager made a quick note and scurried off. She didn't have to raise her voice. Everyone knew that when Celeste Morgan spoke, she meant business. Langford Global Holdings had grown from a family-owned hotel group into a multinational conglomerate with assets in real estate, tech, and luxury brands across 5 continents. But while Edward Langford, her husband, stood at podiums and rang the closing bell on Wall Street, Celeste ensured the empire stayed polished. For years, she played her role with exquisite precision. Not passive, not loud, present. She remembered birthdays of board members' children, sent handwritten notes to international partners, and could read a room like a seasoned diplomat. This dinner, however, wasn't just any dinner. It was the annual board gala, a gathering of power players, shareholders, division leaders, and family members. Everyone who mattered would be here, and Celeste had curated every element, from the guest list down to the champagne pairing. Everything had to be perfect. The guests began arriving in waves. First the CFO, then the heads of real estate and luxury development, followed by the legal counsel and a few longtime board members. The twins, Jasmine and Miles, entered moments later, 18 and freshly returned from college for winter break. They were dressed impeccably, the way Celeste taught them, and they greeted the room like seasoned heirs. Celeste smiled, proud but focused. By 7:10, nearly every seat was filled. Every seat except 2. One was at the head of the table, Edward's. The other, traditionally reserved for an honored guest, sat conspicuously beside Celeste. The murmurs had already begun. Edward's lateness wasn't entirely surprising. He had a flair for drama. But this was late even for him. "Shall we begin with the champagne course, ma'am?" A server whispered at her side. Celeste paused. She looked out at the room, all eyes waiting on her. She gave a nod. "Yes, let's pool." As the servers moved between tables, uncorking the vintage Brut Reserve, a hush settled over the room. Crystal flutes were lifted, golden bubbles rising like secrets waiting to burst. And that's when the doors opened. Every head turned. Edward Langford stepped into the room with the ease of a man used to owning it. Tall, broad-shouldered, still impossibly handsome in his tailored charcoal suit, he wore the smugness of someone who believed his charm could solve any problem. But it wasn't Edward that made the room gasp. It was the woman on his arm. She was young, maybe late 20s. Her blonde hair was blown out in soft curls, her red gown hugging a very visible baby bump. Her heels clicked with the confidence of someone who didn't understand the rules she was breaking, or perhaps didn't care. Behind the couple, a second of stunned silence passed. Then came the whispers. "Is that? She's pregnant. Wait, isn't that the new exec from the Shanghai division? Oh my God." Heather Caldwell. She wasn't just some arm candy. She was technically a Langford Global employee. She had joined the company only a year ago, working under special projects for Asia Pacific. Most assumed it was a temporary role, a favor. A distraction. Apparently, it was more than that. "Good evening, everyone," Edward announced, his voice smooth, eyes scanning the room with theatrical flair. "Apologies for the delay. I'd like to introduce someone very special to me. This is Heather Caldwell, our Director of Special Projects for the Asian market and the mother of my future son." Celeste remained seated. Around her, forks paused midair. Board members froze. Jasmine's expression turned to stone, while Miles shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Edward looked at his wife, as if daring her to crack. But she didn't. Celeste rose slowly from her chair, her face calm, unreadable. She moved toward the couple with effortless grace. Not a single tremor in her hand, not a quiver in her voice. "Heather," she said warmly, extending her hand. "Welcome. You'll sit beside me." Heather blinked, stunned. "Thank you, Mrs. Langford. Call me Celeste," she replied. "Tonight, you're our guest of honor." Edward's face twitched, ever so slightly. This wasn't the reaction he had expected. He wanted rage, drama, a meltdown, something to make Heather feel vindicated. But what he got instead was far more dangerous. Strategic grace. Celeste turned back toward the dining table and gestured for the server. "Please bring another place setting here, and bring the 2005 Bordeaux. My husband prefers it with scandal." Laughter bubbled at the edge of the room, nervous and scattered. Celeste didn't flinch. She returned to her seat and gestured for Heather to sit beside her, right where the honored guest would go. As Heather lowered herself into the chair, still stunned, Celeste reached for her champagne flute and raised it slightly. "To unexpected arrivals," she said coolly. And as the room cautiously followed her lead, no one missed the quiet fire in her eyes, the kind that made it clear this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. But Edward had no idea Celeste had spent the last 15 years preparing for this moment. The first course had barely cooled when Celeste Morgan took back the room. Heather sat beside Celeste now, uncertain but trying to keep up appearances. Her hand stayed close to her lap, smoothing the fabric of her red dress that stretched tightly over her baby bump. The board members, still processing the shock, pretended to focus on the chilled lobster salad in front of them. But Celeste? Celeste adjusted her posture in her seat like a queen reclaiming her throne. With poise honed over years of restraint, she turned slightly to Heather and asked, "Heather, I believe you've been working on our Asia-Pacific market initiatives. What's your vision for expanding into that region?" Heads turned. It was the first real question of the night, and it had nothing to do with scandal. Heather, caught off guard, blinked. "Oh, yes. Well," she cleared her throat and straightened. "My background is in luxury market analysis. I spent 2 years consulting in Singapore before joining Langford. What I noticed is that while Western brands are making a presence, they often miss the cultural nuance. They import their image without tailoring their message." Celeste nodded with interest, inviting her to continue. "And how do you propose Langford adapts to that?" Edward, fork midair, watched in visible confusion as Heather launched into an explanation of localized branding strategies, consumer behavior in Shanghai versus Kuala Lumpur, and her proposal for a boutique hotel model based on cultural immersion. To her own surprise, Heather was winning the room. The board listened. Some even leaned in. Across the table, Harold Jenkins, the longest-serving board member, murmured to the CFO, "She actually knows her stuff." And Celeste, still serene, led the applause when Heather finished. Impressive. Truly. It was then that Edward seemed to notice the slip in his grip. He wasn't the center of the room anymore. Celeste's orchestration was too elegant to be overt, but the effect was undeniable. She was moderating the conversation now, directing it. Heather had spoken more about Langford's strategy in 15 minutes than Edward had since he walked in. And Edward felt it. As the plates were cleared for the second course, he attempted to regain control. He tapped his glass gently and smiled. "I suppose now's as good a time as any to address what's on everyone's mind." All eyes returned to him. "I know my presence tonight, and Heather's, may have caught some of you off guard," he said. "But business, like life, requires adaptability. Heather and I are expecting a son, and I believe he will be an important part of Langford Global's future." A ripple passed through the room. Celeste remained still. Edward continued, more guarded now. Change is inevitable. Celeste and I have had conversations about this, and we're in the process of dissolving our marriage in a respectful, mutually beneficial way. At that, Jasmine's water glass clinked too sharply against her plate. And as for our children, Edward added, voice cooling slightly, Jasmine and Miles are still young. They've got years ahead before corporate roles even become relevant. For now, we focus on the future, and that means expanding with people who share vision and capability. The implication lingered. Heather, trying not to look embarrassed, busied herself with her napkin. Celeste blinked slowly, then smiled with something dangerously close to amusement. I see, she said. She reached under the table and pulled out a small, sleek leather document case. No one moved. With the calm precision of someone filing paperwork on a slow afternoon, Celeste opened it and withdrew a single document, printed on thick ivory paper, crisp and folded once across the middle. I'd like to clarify something for the benefit of the board, she said. Edward's smile faded. This is a copy of the trust agreement drafted and signed by Edward's late father, James Langford, shortly before his passing. Many of you were on the board when this was first put into effect 15 years ago. She laid the document on the table, smoothing the fold. This clause here, Celeste continued, tapping the text with a manicured finger, states that 58% of Langford Global's voting shares were transferred to a trust, one held not by the CEO, but by the CEO's legally recognized spouse. Silence dropped like an anvil. Edward shifted in his seat. That trust was symbolic. My father wanted. Celeste cut him off, still polite, still smiling. It's not symbolic. I've signed every proxy authorization you've ever submitted to the board. My name is on every decision. You've never had control. You were the face, Edward. I was the vote. The room sat in stunned stillness. Harold reached across the table and lifted the document, adjusting his glasses. He scanned it, expression unreadable. She's right, he said after a long pause. That clause is clear, legally binding. I remember when James pushed it through. Celeste's voice remained gentle, almost comforting. My husband and I had an understanding. He preferred the spotlight. I preferred the shadows. But I never relinquished my rights. Not then. Not now. Edward's jaw tensed. You're making a spectacle of this. No, Celeste said, her tone sharpening just slightly. You did that when you arrived with your mistress in your ear. Heather looked as though she might vanish into the floor. And since we're being transparent, Celeste continued, the trust isn't the only thing worth discussing tonight. She gestured to a staff member standing discreetly by the wall. The young woman moved forward and began distributing navy blue folders to each board member. Edward watched, visibly sweating now. Inside, you'll find financial documents I obtained with the help of our internal audit team and independent forensic accountants, Celeste said. They detail the movement of approximately $43.7 million from Langford Global Holdings into shell companies registered in Singapore. These entities are not affiliated with our corporation. They're solely in Edward's name. There was no gasp this time, only a deadly quiet. Board members flipped through the pages, the rustle of papers cutting like knives. This is absurd, Edward said, his voice a notch too loud. I've been restructuring for tax efficiency. Everyone does it. No, felicity. What everyone doesn't do is transfer unapproved assets to secret accounts hidden behind a wall of fake partnerships. You've jeopardized the company, Edward, and you've done it while pretending to plan for its future. Jasmine leaned forward, her face pale but eyes sharp. Miles stared down at the table, lips tight. Heather trembled slightly. You said the Singapore division was for our son's future. Celeste didn't flinch. It was for his own escape. Around the table, board members were already murmuring, exchanging glances heavy with consequence. No one looked at Edward. The weight of the moment pressed against the walls. Celeste reached for her water, took a calm sip, and placed the glass back on the table. Then she folded her hands. And just like that, she said quietly, Edward Langford was no longer CEO of the empire he thought he controlled. The morning air was crisp and still as the private elevator ascended to the 60th floor of Langford Global's headquarters. Celeste Morgan stood in its shadow, waiting for the elevator doors to open, dressed like the future. She wore a charcoal gray pantsuit, tailored to precision, paired with a cobalt silk blouse that echoed the sapphire brooch fastened near her collarbone. Her heels clicked with deliberate control as she stepped into the boardroom, flanked by David Cho, head of legal, and a quiet trio of financial analysts carrying bound dossiers. Her hair was styled in soft waves, a simple gold watch on one wrist, and a confidence that didn't need announcing. Already seated around the table were 12 members of the Langford board, each murmuring in pairs, each wondering how to handle the corporate earthquake that had hit less than 12 hours earlier. At the head of the table, Harold Jenkins stood up. "Good morning, Mrs. Morgan. The floor is yours." Celeste paused, then gave a nod of acknowledgement. "Thank you, Harold." She took her place at the head of the table, not beside it, not across from it, but at it, and opened her presentation binder. "I understand yesterday was unexpected," she began, her tone measured, professional. "But I want to assure this board, our employees, and our shareholders that Langford Global remains strong. We will not be shaken by the misconduct of a single executive." There was no need to name Edward. Everyone in the room understood. "We're not just patching holes today. We're redefining the foundation." She pressed a button on the remote in her hand. A screen behind her came to life. Line graphs, asset flows, and strategic realignment plans filled the digital canvas. Celeste continued, "I've worked with our internal teams and third-party auditors to develop a three-phase recovery plan. First, we reclaim and safeguard diverted assets. Second, we stabilize operations and investor confidence. And third, we restructure leadership with long-term ethical governance at its core." She turned another page in her binder. "This brings me to the Morgan Langford Legacy Trust." A murmur went around the table. "This trust will secure 51% of Langford Global Holdings in perpetuity, guided by a charter that emphasizes transparency, sustainability, and merit-based leadership. It ensures that no single individual can ever again compromise our values or direction without consequence." Harold leaned forward, reading through the draft charter. "And this trust, who oversees it?" "A rotating council," Celeste replied, "composed of family representatives and independent advisors, chosen for integrity and alignment with our mission." The room fell quiet again, but this time, not in shock. In consideration. One by one, heads nodded. Pages turned. Signatures were requested. By the time she finished, every hand was raised in agreement. Unanimous. Celeste Morgan was officially confirmed as interim CEO. The room erupted, not with applause, but with respect. She had claimed the seat, and earned it. Then came the part no one expected. As the board began to adjourn, Celeste remained seated. She looked to David Cho and gave him a subtle nod. He stepped into the hallway and returned moments later with Heather Caldwell. All eyes turned. Heather entered tentatively, dressed in a navy blue maternity dress, her face pale but composed. She stood just inside the door, uncertain whether she was welcome. Celeste gestured gently. "Heather, please join us." The young woman moved forward slowly, one hand protectively resting on her rounded belly. "I've asked Heather here today because her situation, while complicated, intersects with our legacy, whether we're ready for that or not." Heather looked startled but didn't speak. "I want to be clear," Celeste continued. "My issue has never been with Heather. She was misled, like many of us. But she's shown integrity since that night and a willingness to separate from the circumstances that brought her here." David handed Heather a folder. Inside was a job offer, official and legitimate, from the company's Singapore partner firm. A 6-month strategic role with full relocation support. Heather's eyes welled up. I don't know what to say." Celeste met her gaze. "You don't have to say anything right now. Just know that the child you're carrying is connected to my children. And I believe in making space for everyone who wants to walk the right path." Heather nodded, swallowing emotion. As she turned to leave, David walked her out, and the room remained frozen in a rare moment of reverence. The next few months moved swiftly, like pieces aligning in a long-game strategy no one else had seen coming. And 3 months later, the Langford Crown Hotel didn't look the same. On the top floor, the once ostentatious executive legacy suite had been remodeled under Celeste's direction. Gone were the oversized oil portraits of Edward and his father. In their place, photographs of Langford staff in communities across the globe, artistic renderings of the company's core values etched in gold on black marble, and a fireplace surrounded by hand-carved wood panels bearing the names of every division worldwide. Tonight, Celeste was hosting a private legacy celebration, not for publicity, not for ego, but for transition. Inside the suite, familiar faces mingled with new ones. The mood was light, yet reverent. Board members laughed, champagne glasses sparkled, and the air buzzed with promise. Jasmine and Miles moved confidently among the guests. No longer children, but heirs with purpose. Jasmine discussed her nonprofit environmental partnership, now officially under the Langford Global banner. Miles was already shadowing one of the lead analysts on sustainability reporting. Both of them beamed when their mothers stepped into the room. Then came a quiet hush as Heather reappeared, 8 months pregnant now, wearing soft flats and a smart linen jacket. She was greeted not with silence or stares, but smiles. Celeste approached her without hesitation and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Welcome back, Heather." "I wasn't sure," Heather began, but Celeste shook her head. "Your family now," she said, "one way or another." As they embraced lightly, the mood in the room softened. The contrast was stunning. Once a battlefield of betrayal, now a circle of quiet transformation. Board members watched with appreciation. They saw not just a leader, but a woman reshaping the very meaning of legacy. Celeste moved to the center of the room and gently tapped her glass. Conversation slowed. People turned. "Thank you for being here," she began. "It's been a season of change. And through that change, we've come to learn that legacy isn't about inheritance. It's about stewardship." She turned toward her children, then toward Heather. "The Morgan Langford Legacy Trust will provide equal opportunity for all descendants of this family. That includes Jasmine. That includes Miles. And yes, it includes the child Heather carries." She paused, allowing the gravity of that to settle. "Because what we build here should never be decided by scandal, entitlement, or ego, but by character and contribution." There was no applause, only solemn nods, a respect deeper than sound. And as the champagne was raised, one final surprise awaited them all. The boardroom was quiet when the final vote was cast. Not tentative, not uncertain, unanimous. Celeste Morgan was no longer interim CEO of Langford Global Holdings. She was its permanent leader. The announcement had come without fanfare, no press release, no orchestrated media coverage, just the clean thud of signatures being laid on paper and the weight of decades shifting hands. As the final document was filed, Celeste stood. She looked out at the board, not with triumph, but with resolve. "I thank you for your trust," she said, her voice firm but warm. "But this appointment isn't a reward. It's a responsibility." A pause. Then she continued, "True leadership isn't about ruling over others. It's about building something that outlasts us, something worthy of those who come after." She turned slightly, glancing out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city glowed below like a circuit board of possibilities. We've all witnessed what happens when legacy becomes entitlement. When power is hoarded, not shared. That era ends today. No one moved. No one spoke. The room was still, charged with the kind of respect that couldn't be demanded, only earned. Afterward, as the board members filed out, one figure lingered by the doorway. Eleanor Langford. Edward's mother stood in quiet observation, her posture tall, her white-gloved hands folded over her handbag. Her face, still elegant despite the lines of age, wore an unreadable expression. Celeste approached her slowly. There had always been civility between them, but never warmth. Tonight felt different. "I didn't expect you to attend," Celeste said gently. Eleanor gave a short breath of acknowledgement. "I almost didn't. But then I remembered something James once told me. A dynasty is only as strong as the woman who guards its heart." Celeste met her gaze, uncertain how to respond. Then Eleanor reached into her handbag and drew out a small, dark velvet box. "I've held on to this for over 40 years," she said, opening it to reveal an heirloom brooch, gold filigree inlaid with deep emeralds. It belonged to James's grandmother. Every Langford matriarch has worn it at one point or another. She placed it into Celeste's hands. "I believe the legacy is safest with you now." Celeste blinked, overcome, but nodded in gratitude. No fanfare, just an understanding passed in silence. Later that evening, as twilight blanketed the skyline, Celeste sat alone in the executive lounge. The hotel was quiet again, the celebration over, the legacy celebration fading into memory. The polished glass in front of her reflected not just her own face, but everything she had rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. She heard soft footsteps behind her. "Heather." She entered slowly, no longer tentative, no longer afraid. "I wanted to say goodbye before I left for Singapore," she said. Celeste smiled faintly and gestured to the chair across from her. "Seat." Heather lowered herself into the seat, adjusting her coat over her rounded belly. "I'll admit, I wasn't sure you'd ever want to speak to me again." Celeste met her eyes. "You were lied to. So was I. The difference is, we learned. And we did better." A silence passed between them, not heavy, but full of clarity. Heather reached for her bag and handed Celeste a small envelope. Inside was a sonogram. "For Jasmine and Miles. So they can know him. If they want." Celeste took it carefully. "Thank you." They stood. A quiet embrace. Not forced, not performative. A quiet acknowledgement of strength, of shared pain, and of chosen grace. As Heather disappeared down the corridor, Celeste turned back to the view. In the distance, somewhere in Aspen, Edward Langford lived in quiet exile. No interviews, no company shares, no grand send-off. Disgraced but untouched by criminal prosecution, thanks only to Celeste's decision not to press charges. She could have destroyed him, but she didn't. That was never the point. Celeste hadn't survived betrayal. She had redefined what legacy meant. And as the stars blinked awake above the city, the Langford name remained, not as a monument to power, but as a promise of resilience, reinvention, and the strength of a woman who had waited 15 years to rise, with dignity and on her own terms. If this story touched your heart, like, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more powerful, soul-touching stories that restore faith in humanity.